She always said they whispered when it rained. The dolls in my aunt's attic. Scranton never really lets you go. It clings to your lungs like coal dust, seeps into your bones with the damp chill that rolls down from the Pocono Mountains. Especially in that old Victorian house at the end of Spruce Street, where the trees grew thick and greedy, swallowing the weak Pennsylvania sunlight whole. That was where my Aunt Mae lived, and where I spent every stifling summer of my childhood. My parents, city folks from Pittsburgh, thought the mountain air and quiet streets would toughen me up. They didn't understand. Scranton wasn't quiet. Not really. It hummed with the ghosts of breaker boys and miners, with the groan of abandoned collieries. And in that house on Spruce Street, with the whispers that slithered down from the attic when the rain came. Aunt Mae was a relic herself. Tall, thin as a rail, with hands permanently stained from the fabric dyes she used to mend clothes for the few neighbors who still braved the overgrown path to her porch. She never married, never had children. People in town said the Lackawanna Valley had taken her joy when the mines closed, same as it had for so many others. But I knew different. Her joy was up there, in the attic. The door to that attic was unlike any other in the house. Set at the end of the second-floor hallway, it was narrow, unpainted wood, warped with age and damp. No knob, just a heavy iron latch, thick with rust the color of dried blood. May kept it fastened with a length of coarse twine, knotted and re-knotted into intricate, ugly tangles. Her warning was etched into me deeper than any scripture learned in Scranton's soot-stained churches. That door stays shut, child. Especially when the rain starts its tap dancing on the roof. Especially then. I was 10 years old the first time the rain brought the voices. A real Scranton gully washer, the kind that turned the streets into rivers thick with coal silt. The wind howled down from the hills like a thing chased, rattling the ancient window panes in their frames. And beneath the storm's fury, beneath the drumming rain and the groan of the old timbers, I heard it. A susurration, a rustling, sighing chorus. Not the wind through the eaves. Words. Dozens, hundreds of tiny voices, whispering over and under each other like creek water over stones. Almost singing, but not quite. The melody was there, familiar as a half-remembered lullaby, but the notes were bent, twisted, backwards. It crawled up the stairs, seeped under my bedroom door, and coiled around my ankles like cold mist. I found myself at the attic door, drawn like a moth to a poisoned flame, pressed my ear against the rough wood. The whispers grew sharper, more distinct. Not English, not any language I knew, just sounds, soft and insistent, like nails scratching on glass from the inside. A hand clamped down on my shoulder, bony and strong. I near jumped out of my skin. Aunt Mae stood there, her face pale as the porcelain she collected, her eyes wide and dark in the gloom of the hallway. The storm's flash lit her face stark white for an instant. Didn't I tell you, boy? Her voice was a rasp, tighter than her knotted twine. You don't listen to that. That ain't singing. That's hunger talking. She steered me downstairs to the kitchen, the only warm room in that drafty mausoleum. The air hung thick with the smell of strong chamomile tea and damp wool. She poured me a cup, her knuckles white where she gripped the chipped enamel pot. The tremble in her hands was worse than usual. The cup rattled against the saucer like a loose tooth. Above us, the whispers rose and fell, a counterpoint to the drumming rain. "What's up there, Aunt Mae?" I asked, my own voice small against the attic's murmur. "Just your collection." Her gaze drifted towards the ceiling, past the water stains on the plaster, towards the source of the sound. "Just my dolls," she murmured, her voice distant, thin. "My girls, they get restless when the barometer drops, like old miners feel it in their bones." She took a slow sip of tea, her eyes unfocused. "They get lonely sometimes. They just want company." The next morning dawned grey and sodden, the storm having washed the world clean only to leave it muddier. The attic door's twine hung loose, frayed ends dangling. It fell apart in my curious fingers, dry and brittle as dead spider silk. Sunlight, weak and grudging, filtered through the grime-caked attic window as I pushed the heavy door open. Dust motes danced in the slanted beams, thick enough to choke on, and I saw them, dozens, hundreds, packed onto sagging wooden shelves, spilling from battered steamer trunks, propped against furniture draped in yellowed sheets like shrouds. Dolls, every kind imaginable. China dolls with smooth, cold faces and painted rosebud mouths. Bisque dolls with complexions like old ivory, their glass eyes staring blankly, clouded with decades of dust. Rag dolls with button eyes and stitched smiles, their fabric bodies limp and shapeless. Some wore elaborate lace christening gowns, now stained brown at the hems like dried blood. Others were dressed as brides, their miniature satin gowns yellowed with age, veils askew over vacant faces. The air hung thick and still, heavy with the cloying scent of decayed fabric, dried lavender that had turned musty, and something else, something sweet and sickly underneath, like overripe fruit left too long in a damp cellar. My breath hitched. I took a step forward, the floorboard groaning like a wounded thing. Dust puffed around my shoes. The dolls stared, row upon row of empty, knowing eyes. Some were missing limbs, an arm ending in a ragged porcelain stump, a leg dangling by a thread. One had a crack running diagonally across its face, splitting its painted smile into something grotesque, and in the far corner, dominating the shadowed space, sat the rocking chair. Old oak, worn smooth by generations of use. And in it, facing the peeling wallpaper of the far wall, sat her, the largest doll by far, nearly the size of a small child. A bride doll, her porcelain face was flawless, untouched by cracks or chips, her complexion a cold, perfect white. A cascade of carefully arranged blonde curls, probably real human hair once, now dull and brittle, spilled from beneath a veil yellowed like ancient parchment. She wore a lace-trimmed satin gown, once white, now the color of weak tea. Her delicate porcelain hands rested on the arms of the rocking chair, fingers slightly curled, as if she had just paused her motion. But it was her posture that struck a chill deeper than the damp Scranton air. The slump of her shoulders beneath the lace, the tilt of her head, not just still, not lifeless, but waiting, patient, exhausted. I must have made a sound, a gasp, a shuffle of my feet, because something rustled behind me, not the settling of an old house, not mice. This was a distinct, dry shifting sound, like stiff fabric moving against itself, like petticoats rustling. I didn't look. Terror, cold and sharp as a knife blade, lanced through my gut. I spun and fled, crashing down the narrow stairs. The image of that waiting bride doll burned onto the back of my eyelids. I slammed the attic door shut behind me, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Aunt Mae found me later, huddled on the bottom step of the main staircase, shivering despite the muggy heat. She didn't yell, didn't scold. She just looked at me, her expression unreadable, a ball of fresh twine in her trembling hand. She walked past me, climbed the stairs to the attic door, and began to retie it. The knots she made were complex, ugly things pulled brutally tight. "They get lonely," she said again, her voice flat, her back to me as she worked the twine. "Especially that one. She's been waiting the longest. They just want someone to play with." The summer I turned 16, the storms were relentless. Thunder rolled down from the mountains like coal cars derailing. Rain hammered the roof for days on end, turning the yard into a swamp. The creek at the bottom of Spruce Street into a roaring brown beast. And the whispers, they changed. Gone was the almost song. Gone was the unsettling murmur. What came down through the ceiling now was a cacophony of need. Hissing, insistent voices layered over each other, demanding, pleading, threatening. The sound wasn't just in the attic anymore. It seeped into the walls, vibrated in the floorboards beneath my bed, echoed inside my own skull when I tried to sleep. It felt like fingers scrabbling at the inside of my mind. On the third night, the worst night, I woke not to whispers, but to tapping. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. Distinct, metallic, sharp. Not the erratic drumming of rain. This was rhythmic, purposeful. Fingernails, tiny, hard fingernails, tapping against glass. Coming from the attic window directly above my room. Slow at first, testing, then faster, more frantic. Tap, 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 tap. I pulled the thin summer blanket over my head, squeezing my eyes shut, pressing my hands over my ears. But the sound wormed its way in. It was inside the room, inside my head. Tap, 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 tap. And then, cutting through the storm's fury and the frantic tapping, came laughter. A child's giggle. High-pitched, bright, or it should have been. But it was hollow, empty, devoid of any real joy. It sounded like something mimicking the idea of laughter, copying the sound without understanding the feeling. And the pause, in the spaces between the giggles, I heard only the wet, rattling intake of breath, like something drowning. The sound didn't come from the attic. It seemed to come from the hallway outside my door, from the foot of my bed, from the cold space right beside my ear beneath the blanket. I lay frozen, drenched in cold sweat, until the grey light of a Scranton dawn finally crept through the rain-streaked window. The storm had lessened to a miserable drizzle. The tapping had stopped. The laughter had ceased. The house was silent. Too silent. No clatter of pots from the kitchen. No soft humming of hymns May sometimes favoured. Just the oppressive weight of quiet, broken only by the drip-drip of water from the leaky porch roof. I called her name, Aunt Mae. My voice cracked, swallowed by the stillness. No answer. I checked her bedroom. The narrow bed was neatly made, untouched. The kitchen was cold, the stove unlit. My gaze, heavy with dread, was drawn inexorably to the end of the second-floor hallway. The attic door stood open, not wide, just a sliver. A vertical line of profound darkness that seemed to suck the weak morning light from the hallway. An invitation, or a wound. I don't remember deciding to climb those stairs. Fear warred with a terrible, morbid certainty. My legs moved as if made of wood, each step up the narrow, steep staircase, a protest against my weight, groaning like the bones of the earth. The air grew thicker with every step, colder, saturated with that cloying scent of decay and sweetness, now overpowering. It coated the back of my throat, made me gag. The attic gloom was deep. The single window, crusted with grime, let in only a feeble, dirty light. Dust hung like a shroud. And there, in the rocking chair, sat Aunt Mae. She was slumped back, her head tilted at an unnatural angle against the high back of the chair, her mouth slightly open. Her eyes were wide, staring fixedly at the grimy attic window, but they saw nothing. They were vacant, glassy. A terrible serenity smoothed the usual lines of worry from her face. Cradled in her arms, pressed against her shoulder like a sleeping child seeking comfort, was the bride doll. The doll's perfect porcelain face nestled against Mae's neck. Its painted lips were curved into a faint, knowing smile. Its blue glass eyes, startlingly clear amidst the dust, seemed fixed on nothing and everything. And as I stood there, frozen in the doorway, my blood turning to ice, I saw it. The bride doll's chest, beneath the yellowed satin bodice. It rose, just a fraction, a subtle swell, and then it fell, as if it had sighed. A sound tore from my throat, raw and primal. A scream ripped from the deepest pit of terror. I didn't look back. I fled, down the stairs, through the silent, watching house, out into the rain-slicked yard, down Scranton's muddy streets. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I ran all the way to the Greyhound station, bought a ticket with shaking hands, and didn't stop running until the smokestacks and hills of Scranton were far behind me. I built a life, in Philadelphia, then later in Baltimore, a normal life, a job, an apartment, fleeting relationships that never stuck. I tried to bury the memories of Spruce Street, of the whispers and the tapping and the sight of Mae holding that doll. I told myself it was grief playing tricks, the overactive imagination of a scared kid. But Scranton has long arms. It pulls on the threads of your soul, especially those tied to its soil. 20 years later, the lawyer's letter found me, crisp, formal. Aunt Mae's Victorian house, its contents, and whatever lurked within its walls were mine. Inheritance, no buyers. The lawyer added, a note of strained politeness in his voice. Not even after significant price reductions. The people here, Mr. Evans, they remember your aunt. They remember her collection. I tried to ignore it, to let the house rot. But the dreams started. Vivid, choking nightmares filled with the scent of decay and the sound of porcelain fingers tapping on glass. Whispers that woke me in the dead of night, sounding suspiciously like my own voice murmuring words I didn't understand. The weight of eyes on me in my dark bedroom, eyes the color of cold lake ice. Blue, Scranton called, not with words, but with a deep, resonant pull in my bones, like the tremor before a mine collapse. I had to go back, to face it, to end it. The house welcomed me with a deeper chill than I remembered. The air tasted of dust, coal residue, and that underlying sweetness, stronger now, like forgotten fruit fermenting in a sealed jar. Neglect hung heavy. Wallpaper peeled in long strips like flayed skin. Water stains bloomed on the ceilings like dark flowers. And the silence, it wasn't empty, it was watchful. I found the attic door. The twine was gone. The latch hung loose. The door itself was closed, but it felt flimsy, insubstantial. A barrier made of paper against what lay beyond. I tried to burn them. It seemed the only way. On a dry, brittle October night, the kind where dead leaves skittered like skeletal fingers across the porch, I gathered them. Every doll I could find. The china ladies with their vacant stares. The rag dolls with their limp limbs. The bridesmaids in their stained finery. I dragged them down the groaning attic stairs, their glass eyes catching the beam of my flashlight like malevolent stars. I piled them in the overgrown backyard, a grotesque pyre of childhood innocence twisted into something ancient and wrong. The smell intensified, decay, lavender, that sickly sweetness, and now the sharp tense of fierce wet on my own skin. I doused the pile liberally with gasoline. The fumes rose, acrid and dizzying, making my eyes water. I struck a match. The tiny flame flared, a beacon of hope in the oppressive Scranton dark. But as I moved to touch it to the gasoline-soaked fabric of a christening gown, my hand locked, not cramped, not hesitant, locked. My fingers curled into a rigid claw around the match, frozen like the porcelain limbs of the dolls at my feet. I strained, muscles screaming, sweat pouring down my face despite the chill. It felt like cold, impossibly strong little fingers were wrapped around my wrist, holding me back. An unseen force pressed against me, thick and heavy as the attic air. The match sputtered. The flame guttered, shrinking, and died. A wisp of smoke curled from the charred tip. From inside the house, faint but unmistakable, came the sound. Creak, 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 the rhythmic groan of the rocking chair, moving, empty. I dropped the dead match. Stumbling back from the pile, my breath came in ragged gasps. On my arms, beneath the sleeves of my jacket, I felt a sudden, icy coldness. Later, in the weak light of the bathroom, I saw them. Bruises. 5 small, perfectly round bruises on my left forearm, like fingerprints left by a child with impossibly cold hands. Now, the rain is my tormentor. Every drop that hits the roof is a herald. The whispers return, not just from the attic now, but from the walls themselves. They coil through the heating vents, vibrate in the pipes. Sometimes they shape themselves into Aunt Mae's voice, soft and frayed, murmuring about loneliness. Other times, the voice is chillingly, intimately familiar. My own voice, whispering secrets I don't know, promises I never made. The tapping starts at the attic window, sharp and impatient. Tap, tap, tap. Then it moves. Down the wall beside my bed. Tap, tap, tap. Then onto the ceiling directly above me as I lie paralyzed in the dark. Tap, 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 tap. A frantic, demanding Morse code. And she's here. The bride doll. She no longer waits in the attic. She stands in the corner of my bedroom, where the shadows are deepest. Her blue glass eyes catch the faintest sliver of moonlight, glowing with their own cold internal light. Watching, her porcelain face is perpetually tilted, her faint smile eternally patient, waiting for me to understand, to accept. The attic door hasn't been closed since the night I tried to burn them. It stands open now, a black maw exhaling cold air that smells of graves and forgotten things. From the darkness within, the sound is constant. Creak, 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 the rocking chair, swaying back and forth, an empty cradle, a patient throne. They are lonely, the whispers sigh, sometimes in Mae's voice, sometimes in mine. So very lonely. And it's true, the isolation here is absolute. It's more than just being physically alone in this decaying house on the edge of a town that remembers its ghosts. It's a loneliness that seeps into your marrow, a cold that no fire can touch. It's the loneliness of being the only living thing in a place that belongs to the dead and the porcelain. The loneliness of being watched by 100 unblinking eyes. The loneliness of knowing you are becoming part of the collection. And now, so am I. The rain will come again. It always does in Scranton. The whispers will rise like a tide. The tapping will begin its insistent rhythm, and the rocking chair will creak its invitation. One night, when the loneliness becomes too heavy, a weight no human soul was meant to bear, I will climb those stairs. I will walk into that darkness. I will settle into the smooth, worn hollows of that oak rocking chair. I will reach out into the gloom and cold. Smooth fingers will meet mine. I will draw the bride doll onto my lap, her weight familiar, her porcelain head finding the hollow of my shoulder, and we will rock, back and forth, back and forth. The whispers will welcome me. The tapping will cease. The loneliness will finally, blessedly end. Scranton never lets go of what is hers. The coal dust, the memories, the lost souls, and the dolls, never the dolls. They say the veins of anthracite built this town, dug deep, brought wealth, brought despair. But down here at the end of Spruce Street, where the woods crowd in and the fog clings like a shroud, I know the deeper truth. It was always the attics, always the dolls, always the slow, patient hunger in the whispering rain. And soon, very soon, I will feed it. We will never be lonely again. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more, leave a like and subscribe. And if you have a true or creepy story you'd like us to tell, send it to the email in the description below. Until next time, sleep tight.